The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, we are going to discuss the Survivor cards that were spoiled for the Feast of Hemlock Vale, the next Investigator expansion for the Arkham Horror LCG. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. You all rock. If you'd like to be amazing like these people and support the channel's goals and see your name on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Special thanks to Cole Monroe Chitty, Nicole Fiscus, and Nate Lost in Time and Space for their contributions to the channel. I couldn't do it without you. Without further ado, let's get started. During the live stream at Gen Con last week, designer Duke Harris also spoiled several Survivor cards that would find a home in a Hank Samson deck. During the live stream at Gen Con last week, designer Duke Harris also spoiled several Survivor cards that could definitely find a home in a Hank Samson deck. We're going to take a look at those now. The first card is Pitchfork. It is a 3-cost asset with a combat and agility skill icon, item, tool, weapon, and melee traits. As an action you fight, you get +1 combat and deal +2 damage. For this attack, if this attack is successful, lose control of Pitchfork and attach it to your location. Your location gains action, take control of Pitchfork. Any investigator at Pitchfork's location may trigger this ability, and it takes up 2 hand slots. Now, any level 0 weapon that doesn't require ammo that can deal 3+ damage in one attack is definitely no joke. Probably the closest card that we have currently to Pitchfork is Sledgehammer, which was released back in the Edge of the Earth Investigator expansion. It also costs 3 resources. It has only 1 combat skill icon. Same traits. For an action you can fight, you get -1 combat and deal +1 damage for this attack. Or you can take a double action and fight. You get +2 combat and deal +2 damage for this attack. Pitchfork and Sledgehammer do roughly the same thing, but they do it in a slightly different way. With the Pitchfork, you're getting roughly 3 actions worth of effort for 2 actions, 1 to fight and 1 to take control of the Pitchfork, while the Sledgehammer, you're also getting roughly 3 actions worth of effort, but you have to take the double action in order to get that. Personally, I like the Pitchfork's take on this. Losing control of the Pitchfork after the attack is a nice thematic touch. And the fact that any investigator at the location may take control of the Pitchfork could come in very handy in multiplayer. There aren't a lot of really easy ways to pass weapons among players. If you're a combat-oriented survivor, you've got the Pitchfork, you throw it, deal a whole bunch of damage to an enemy, if not kill it outright, and then some other investigator at that location can pick up the Pitchfork and you can pass the Pitchfork back and forth between those 2 investigators, depending on who has the actions to pick it up. The only downside, of course, is that it does require 2 hand slots, which is somewhat awkward in solo. I tend to prefer weapons that only take 1 hand slot because you usually need your other hand for some sort of investigation tool. That said, this expansion is going to include a lot of support for cards with the tool trait, which the Pitchfork has. And we've already seen Dr. Charles West III, who is an ally that provides an extra hand slot. Now, he is a Seeker ally. Highly doubt Hank will have access to him, but we have seen support for the tool trait in the expansion so far, so perhaps survivors will get some way. Of course, if Hank does have access to the Guardian card pool, even if he only has access to level 1 to 5, there is Bandolier 2, that can give him an extra hand slot, so he can wield either multiple weapons or the Pitchfork and some other investigating tool. So I really, really like the Pitchfork. I like it a lot better than the Sledgehammer. The fact that you only have to take a single action to use the Pitchfork, I think just makes it more versatile than the Sledgehammer. You're not locking yourself into taking the double action. Yeah, you're going to have to retrieve the Pitchfork at some point, but you can sort of throw the Pitchfork, deal with the enemy, do other things you need to do, and then when you've got a spare action and the location is clear, you can pick up the Pitchfork and away you go. Or you can just leave the Pitchfork behind. Hey, who knows? Maybe you need to double back across the map, and you can just leave the Pitchfork there in case you draw an enemy later in the game and you need to deal with it on your way back, like in a scenario like the Ruins of Etsley. So Pitchfork is a very good card. I'm actually kind of surprised, honestly, that we got a card like Pitchfork, considering that Sledgehammer was just released only 2 expansions ago. Honestly, I think Pitchfork is better than Sledgehammer in most ways. So really like the look of Pitchfork. The next card we're going to look at is Sparrow Mask. It is a 1-cost asset with willpower and agility skill icons, item, charm, and mask trait. Limit 1 mask per investigator. Uses 2 offerings. Replenish one of these offerings after you take 1 or more damage and/or horror. And as a free triggered ability, spend 1 offering. You get +2 willpower or +2 agility for this skill test. Limit once per test. Man, oh man, this card feels pushed. It feels like it's straight up better than a lot of the talents that we have in the game right now. I mean, just compare it to even Dig Deep level 4. I mean, Dig Deep level 4 has more icons, but uses 2 resources that replenish themselves, much like the Sparrow Mask. Has a free triggered ability where you can spend 1 from Dig Deep level 4 to get +1 willpower and +1 agility. The Sparrow Mask gives you +2 and +2. I mean, you can only use it once per test, but man, oh man, that's great. Plus, replenishing the offerings on this thing is really quite easy, even for somebody like Hank Sampson. It just incentivizes him to take damage and horror, which he already wants to do once you flip to his bonded versions to either gain resources or draw cards. If Hank takes a damage or a horror, not only does he get resources and cards, now he gets skill test bonuses as well. That's pretty awesome. Now you are limited to 1 mask per investigator, but you can still include 2 copies in your deck. So once you draw the first copy, you just throw the second to either a willpower or agility skill test, which, you know, depending on your Hank build, he may want that agility skill icon, which works out awfully nice for him. Hank, of course, if you've only got 4 sanity, you're going to want the +2 willpower. And if Hank is able to include cards like Dodge level 2 or Sweeping Kick in his deck, that extra agility is going to come in handy. And of course, if the elusive keyword requires an evade test, then +2 agility is also going to help there. So I suspect that Sparrow Mask is going to be an auto include in pretty much every Hank Sampson deck, head and shoulders above a lot of the talents we already have. And I think it just sort of relegates those talents to the binder at this point. I don't see much reason to play them over Sparrow Mask. The only sort of significant difference is that those talents let you spend multiple resources to boost your skill value as high as you want, while the Sparrow Mask is limited to spending 1 offering per test. But if you're getting +2 willpower and then you throw some skill cards at the test, you're probably going to pass anyway. So now I should point out that Sparrow Mask also has the charm trait, which synergizes with Amina Zidane. I do have an Amina Zidane deck that I have been playing around with, so I'm looking forward to seeing whether Sparrow Mask can find a home in that deck. Obviously, Amina likes the +2 willpower a lot. Sparrow Mask also begs the question whether each class is going to be receiving a mask that is comparable to the talents that they currently have. The card fan on the Asmodee Germany website indicates that Guardians are receiving a mask as well, and I wouldn't doubt that all the other classes will have their own version of the mask. I believe the Guardian one, if I remember correctly, it has, it's sort of obscured, but I think it gives you combat and agility. I could be mistaken about that though. But if each class gets a mask, I think the masks are going to be played a lot because they're just very, very good for what they do. Of course, the mask trait also raises the specter of Nyarlathotep. He is it is a big fan of masks. So perhaps Nyarlathotep plays some type of role in the campaign We don't really have a good idea of who the big bad is going to be in the Feast of Hemlock Vale. I'm leaning towards Shub-Niggurath because of the mutated plant life and whatnot. That seems to go well with a deity that is sort of related to fertility, but the appearance of these mask cards means that perhaps Nyarlathotep is the one pulling the strings in this campaign. Overall, I mean, what can I say about the Sparrow Mask? It's pretty awesome. Relegates a bunch of cards to the binder, and I think it's going to be an auto-include in an investigator like Hank, and I wouldn't be surprised if all the other masks find a home in their respective investigators as well. The next Survivor card is Push to the Limit. It is a 2-cost event with a willpower and combat skill icon, tactic and improvise trait. Choose a weapon or tool asset in your discard pile, resolve an action ability on that asset, ignoring all costs, including its action cost. After this effect resolves, shuffle the chosen asset into your deck. Playing this card does not provoke attacks of opportunity. So here's a way to get weapon or tool assets back from the discard pile. Say if you have a 45 automatic in your discard pile, you can play Push to the Limit, fire that gun once, and then shuffle it back into your deck. Push to the Limit does have the tactic and improvise traits, which synergize with Mark Harrigan, as well as the parallel version of Ashcan Pete, although I don't think Ashcan really benefits from that. There is I think a cute combo with Push to the Limit and Act of Desperation. Say if your gun is empty on the table, you play Act of Desperation to throw the gun at the enemy, and you get the combat and damage bonuses. And then you can play Push to the Limit once the gun hits the discard pile to essentially throw the gun again at the enemy and then shuffle it back into your deck. Is this combination any better than just playing a second copy of the weapon that you have? Or if you're playing a gun, just buying extra ammunition? Probably not, but it is sort of fun and thematic. Again, I cannot express my disappointment enough that Ashcan Pete's replacement signature card, Pete's Guitar, can't use either of these cards. Man, that would be so cool. First, using Act of Desperation to bash somebody over the head with Pete's Guitar, Honky Tonk Man style, and then taking another swing at them with the guitar with Push to the Limit as you shuffle it back into your draw deck. Alas, it's not to be. You cannot use Act of Desperation on the guitar, and the guitar does not have weapon or tool trait, so you can't use it with Push to the Limit either. So the designers have thought of everything. They've stopped me from smashing people with guitars repeatedly, which is unfortunate. I do kind of like Push to the Limit simply because if it is a good way to get a weapon or tool back from your discard pile late in the game, say you're playing, I don't know, anything, any weapon, and your gun's out of ammo and you're desperate and you just sort of need a couple of extra attacks. Your draw deck's thin, so you play Push to the Limit, make an attack with that weapon, and then shuffle it into your deck. And if your deck's thin enough, you can draw that weapon right away and then play it again to keep the pressure on. So that's good. The only issue that I can really see with this card is just finding the deck space for it. There are an awful lot of fantastic Survivor events. I mean, you've got Lucky, you've got Live and Learn, you've got Look What I Found. The list goes on and on. Even Act of Desperation finds its way into a lot of combat-oriented Survivor decks, and it's just a question: do I have the deck space for 1 or 2 copies of Push to the Limit, or do I want to use those deck slots for something else? I think that's what it's really going to come down to. The next card we're going to take a look at is Stall for Time. It's a 1-cost event with a willpower and intellect skill icon. The tactic and trick trait: Parlay, choose an enemy at your location. Test X willpower, where X is the chosen enemy's fight or evade value, whichever is lower. If you succeed, exhaust the chosen enemy, but do not disengage from it. If it is a non-elite enemy, it does not ready during the upkeep phase. If you fail, return stall for time to your hand. So the difficulty of the willpower skill test on this one is likely going to be the enemy's evade value, simply because the evade value of enemies tends to be slightly lower than their fight values on average. Obviously, the parlay action on this synergizes with Alessandra Zorzi, who gets an extra action each turn as long as it is a parlay action. It is nice that you can evade aloof enemies or enemies engaged with other investigators with this one, so you can definitely help your friends. I believe this one, if you use it on an aloof enemy, it will simply exhaust and then remain exhausted for a turn. So if you need to put some distance between yourself and those nasty whippoorwills, this is one good way of doing that. Or if you need to help out a friend, there aren't a lot of cards that let you evade enemies engaged with other investigators, so that can be very helpful to solve a problem if that investigator has more pressing business than dealing with an enemy. It's awfully nice that the non-elite enemy remains exhausted during the next upkeep phase. Now, you don't get to disengage with it, so you're going to have to deal with that enemy eventually, but at least this gives you another turn or two to draw into another enemy management solution, or even just draw a skill card that has some more agility skill icons on it so you can evade it properly. So you are just sort of, like the card says, stalling for time, but the card does feature Patrice Hathaway in the art, which again makes a lot of sense. If Patrice needs to stall for time, she plays this, and then during the next, I think at the start of her next turn, she draws an entirely fresh hand, so she has a whole bunch of new tools at her disposal to deal with that enemy. So it makes a lot of sense. And of course, the icing on the cake is that if you happen to fail, stall for time returns to your hand, and so you can, as long as you've got the resources to pay for it, you can try to stall for time again. So I do quite like this card. Pretty cool design. Gives you a little bit of time to find, like, if you can't deal with the enemy right away, it does buy you some time in order to deal with it later. I expect to see this in at least Alessandra decks, if not other Survivor decks going forward. The next card we're going to look at is Wrong Place, Right Time. It is a free event with willpower, intellect, and wild skill icons, spirit, and double trait. As an additional cost to play Wrong Place, Right Time, spend an action. So that is the double trait. Cards with the double trait always cost an extra action. Move up to 5 damage and or horror from your investigator to assets controlled by investigators at your location. For each asset defeated by this effect, draw 1 card, remove Wrong Place, Right Time from the game. So this is a free event, but it will cost you 2 actions. It has obvious synergy with the bonded versions of Hank Sampson, who cannot be healed, but you can move damage or horror from them to other assets. So if you are in danger of dying a second time in the game, Hank can take the 2 actions to play Wrong Place, Right Time, dump all of his damage and or horror on assets controlled by any investigator at his location in multiplayer, and get a new lease on life. It does have some nice interaction with Hank's ability to soak damage and horror for other investigators. So say playing 2-player and your partner hasn't drawn their ally yet to soak damage and horror for them, Hank can do that, and then Hank can play Wrong Place, Right Time once they draw their ally to basically send that damage and horror back to those assets. So there's a nice sort of interplay there between Hank's ability to soak the damage and horror, and then in multiplayer at least send that damage and horror back to those assets, which those investigators may not have had at the time they needed them. I can think of a few other investigators who might like this card, including Tommy Muldoon and Calvin Wright. This card with Tommy can get absolutely bonkers. If you're just playing Tommy alone, Tommy can basically play this to dump a bunch of damage and horror on his assets and then get resources for it. If you were to, say, team up Tommy with Hank, Hank could play this card to move a bunch of his damage and horror onto Tommy's assets, kill them. So Hank is drawing cards and Tommy is gaining resources. So it's a win-win for everybody at that point. So that would be a pretty awesome play. Calvin might like it because when you're playing Calvin, you're really sort of walking a fine line, you want to take damage and horror, but you don't want to take enough that will defeat you. This gives you yet another way of sort of moving that damage and horror around so you can really sort of dial in what you want your skills to be. Of course, it's worth mentioning that there's that spirit trait again. So if Hank can take Guardian cards level 1 to 5, he could play Boxing Gloves, and Boxing Gloves would enable him to search for Wrong Place, Right Time, which he could then play. So once Hank's out there fighting with his Boxing Gloves, punching out enemies, once he's taken a little bit of damage and horror, he uses the Boxing Gloves to find Wrong Place, Right Time to move that damage and horror to assets either that he controls or that other investigators control. And if you've got him sort of sparring with Tommy Muldoon, Tommy gains resources, Hank gets cards, and everybody rejoices. So this one seems like it's going to be very strong in Hank at least, and Tommy really likes it as well, and I'm sure other investigators may find a home for it as well. It does take 2 actions, that's a pretty steep price, but I think if you can leverage the card draw for this, especially in a survivor who don't have access to a lot of that, it will be worth packing at least 1 copy of this in a Hank Samson deck. The final card we are going to talk about is Longshot. It's a skill that has no skill icons, the practice trait. You may commit Longshot to a fight or evasion test against an enemy at your location or a connecting location. If this test is successful, deal 1 damage to that enemy. Now, I talked a little bit earlier with Sparrow Mask that the designers really seem to be pushing the design space, and Longshot is once again, I think, an example of that. It lacks icons, but it does deal 1 damage to an enemy, which gives survivors and off-class survivors access to a vicious blow-like effect, which they can retrieve with cards like Resourceful. One of the issues that investigators like Ashcan Pete have is that while they would love to have access to Vicious Blow, they only get access to, 5 level 0 cards from any class, or in the case of the parallel Ashcan Pete, 5 Guardian cards. So committing 2 of those card slots to Vicious Blow is a pretty big chunk of your deck building. So along comes Longshot. Now survivors don't have to dip into Guardian to get extra damage. They're not going to get any skill icons out of it, but that's easier to work around than bonus damage. Extra skill icons is a lot easier to come by than bonus damage. And the fact that they have so many ways of recurring this card, man, even Silas, holy crow, Silas could be a monster with this card, able to commit it if he doesn't succeed, or he just bounces it back to his hand. There's just so many options with this one. Of course, it does have the practice trait, which of course synergizes with practice makes perfect. So if you're playing, say, a Seeker/Survivor, you can search your deck for Longshot and commit it to a skill test and then pull Longshot back to your hand to do it again with practice makes perfect. You can commit this to tests at connecting locations as well, which is fantastic. Rita can use this in combination with her reaction to deal 2 damage to an enemy on an evade. That's really good. I've already mentioned Parallel Ashcan can use this instead of Vicious Blow, which frees up 2 more Guardian slots if you're going with that build. Again, I think this card is another clue that Hank Samson is only going to have access to level 0 Survivor cards, 5 Guardian cards level 0, and then Guardian cards 1 to 5. Hank isn't necessarily going to want to commit 2 of his Guardian slots to Vicious Blow. Instead, he can take Longshot, which will sort of fill the hole until he can purchase Vicious Blow level 2, or, purchase Vicious Blow level 2 and just keep Longshot in his deck so he has a whole bunch of extra damage. This card is, man, it's incredible. There are a lot of different investigators who like this card, and I think it will free up some deck building for quite a few different investigators who want a Vicious Blow-like effect, but either can't take it or are limited by their deck building options. So designers really are pushing some of these cards. Pitchfork just seems like a better version of Sledgehammer, at least for me. I'm not a big fan of the double action on Sledgehammer. Pitchfork is just much more versatile, does a ton of damage, and you can trade it among other players at the table. It just seems like a win-win. The Sparrow Mask is just better than pretty much all of the talents that survivors have access to, at least the dig deep versions. It's just better. And it's not hard for Hank to trigger it. Wrong Place, Right Time seems to have a place in at least Hank, if not Tommy, and some other survivors out there. And then, of course, Longshot is sort of a dream come true for the survivor class, because now they have access to bonus damage, and they don't have to dip into survivor, which often will cost them card slots that are limited to begin with. And now they have a way of dealing bonus damage without having to do that. Doesn't have skill icons, but as I said, getting access to extra skill icons to pass the skill test is a lot easier than cards with bonus damage, which are few and far between. So I expect to see the Pitchfork, Sparrow Mask, and Longshot make an appearance in an awful lot of decks going forward. And they will definitely be making the cut in some of mine. I'm still salivating at the thought of Silas with Longshot. That's going to be pretty great. That's going to do it. If you enjoy this type of content, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to be back soon. I think I'm going to build a Kate deck and sort of roughly approximate what her deck building options are, and we may take her for a spin. So stay tuned for that. I also owe everybody a Parallel Pete playthrough, which I'm looking forward to bringing you. Hope you're having a great day, and thanks again for your support. Take care. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoyed what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.